Picture this. You're standing in the most magnificent cathedral in Europe, wearing a crown that weighs more than a newborn baby, and guess what? You've actually got a real baby growing inside you that nobody's supposed to know about. The choir's singing, thousands of eyes are watching, and you're literally carrying the biggest secret of your life under layers of silk and velvet. One wrong move, one moment of weakness, and the entire kingdom finds out before you're ready. Welcome to the most dangerous game of hide-and-seek ever played, where the stakes weren't just your reputation. They were your life, your crown, and the future of entire nations. We're talking about real women who stood in front of God and country, swearing oaths and accepting crowns, while their bodies were doing something nobody in that room could have imagined. These weren't just secrets, they were ticking time bombs wrapped in royal robes. And yeah, some of these women pulled it off. Others, well, let's just say history has a way of exposing everything eventually. So buckle up, because we're about to dive into 8 wild stories of queens, empresses, and princesses who played the most high-stakes game of deception ever recorded. And trust me, some of these revelations are gonna blow your mind. Let's start with the woman who literally changed the course of English history with what was hiding under her coronation gown. Anne Boleyn walked into Westminster Abbey on June 1st, 1533, and everyone thought they were just watching another royal coronation. Standard stuff, right? Wrong. Anne was carrying something way more valuable than the crown they were about to put on her head. She was 3 months pregnant with the future Queen Elizabeth I, and yeah, that wasn't exactly public knowledge yet. Well, not officially anyway. Here's where it gets crazy. Henry VIII had literally torn England away from the Catholic Church, divorced his first wife, and made himself the head of a whole new church just to marry this woman. The pressure, astronomical, the expectations, through the roof. And Anne's walking down that aisle knowing that if this baby turns out to be another girl, she's basically screwed. Spoiler alert, it was a girl, and yeah, she eventually lost her head over it. But on that day in 1533, she's playing it cool, acting like she's just here for the crown and the ceremony. The wild part is how they designed her coronation dress. Those medieval seamstresses weren't dumb. They knew exactly what they were doing when they created these massive, flowing gowns with empire waistlines that basically hid everything from the chest down. Anne's dress was this incredible purple velvet and ermine situation that could have hidden a whole basketball under there, let alone a 3-month baby bump. The coronation went on for hours, and she had to walk, stand, sit, kneel, and do all this ceremonial stuff while keeping her secret literally under wraps. But here's the thing that really gets me. Everybody kinda knew. Like they officially didn't know, but come on. The timing was suspicious as hell. Henry had just married her in secret a few months earlier, rushed through this whole coronation thing, and suddenly she's announced pregnant like a month later. People weren't stupid, even back in the 1500s. They could do math. But nobody said anything because you don't exactly call out the king's new wife for getting pregnant before the crown was on her head. That's a fast track to the Tower of London, and not for a fun visit. Now let's rewind a bit and talk about the woman Anne replaced, because oh man, this story gets even more twisted. Catherine of Aragon was pregnant during Henry VIII coronation back in 1509, and this is where things get really complicated. Catherine had been married to Henry's older brother Arthur first, but Arthur died young, and then Henry married his brother's widow. Yeah, that was controversial as hell even back then. When Henry became king at just 17 years old, Catherine was already carrying their first child. She wasn't hiding it exactly, but the timing was super awkward because there were all these questions about whether her first marriage had been consummated, and whether this second marriage was even legit in the eyes of God. The pregnancy was supposed to be this amazing sign that God approved of their union. Like, look, we're already making heirs. Everything's fine. Except it wasn't fine because that baby was either stillborn or died shortly after birth. Then Catherine would go on to have multiple pregnancies, and only one kid survived. Mary, the future Bloody Mary. And Henry would eventually decide that all these dead babies and the lack of male heirs was God's punishment for marrying his brother's wife. The irony is insane. The pregnancy that was supposed to prove divine approval became the foundation for Henry's later argument that the marriage was cursed. During that 1509 coronation, Catherine's carrying all this hope and pressure along with that baby. She's Spanish royalty, she's been through hell waiting for this marriage to happen, and now she's finally going to be Queen of England. The pageantry was absolutely massive. We're talking parades, tournaments, feasts that lasted for days. And Catherine's just trying to keep it together, physically and emotionally, while the whole kingdom celebrates and she's dealing with first trimester exhaustion, morning sickness, and the weight of an entire dynasty's expectations. The really messed up part is that both of these women, Anne and Catherine, ended up having their pregnancies, and their bodies become this public property. Like, everyone had an opinion about their ability to produce male heirs. The whole kingdom watched and waited and judged. Being pregnant as a queen wasn't just a personal thing, it was literally a matter of national security. Now let's jump across the channel to France and talk about probably the most famous queen in history, Marie Antoinette. When Marie Antoinette had her coronation-adjacent ceremonies after marrying Louis XVI, there were already whispers and rumors flying around about her body, her fertility, and whether she might already be pregnant. The truth is, she wasn't pregnant at her wedding or the formal ceremonies afterward, but the obsession with her potential pregnancy started literally from day one. The French court was absolutely ruthless about monitoring her menstrual cycle. Can you imagine? They literally had people whose job was to know when the queen was having her period because that meant she wasn't pregnant yet, and France desperately needed an heir. For the first 7 years of their marriage, Marie Antoinette didn't get pregnant at all, and the pressure was absolutely insane. People blamed her, they blamed Louis, they blamed their diet, the position of the stars, everything. When she finally did get pregnant in 1778, it had been nearly a decade since she became queen. By that point, the public was so obsessed with her body that her pregnancy and the birth were basically public spectacles. We're talking about dozens of people crowding into her bedroom to watch her give birth. That's not an exaggeration, that actually happened. But here's where the secret pregnancy angle gets interesting with Marie Antoinette. There were persistent rumors throughout her time as queen that she had affairs and secret pregnancies that were covered up. Were they true? Probably not most of them. But the rumors existed because the French court was this absolutely toxic environment where everybody was spying on everybody else and spreading gossip. Some historians think she might have had a pregnancy scare or a very early miscarriage that was kept quiet at some point. But there's no solid evidence. What is true is that the obsession with Marie Antoinette's womb and her fertility was part of what made her so vulnerable to the propaganda that eventually got her killed. The pamphlets and cartoons that circulated during the Revolution portrayed her as this sexually deviant monster who had illegitimate children and all sorts of made-up scandals. It was character assassination through pregnancy rumors and body horror stories. Let's talk about Empress Josephine for a second, because her story is wild in a completely different way. Josephine wasn't pregnant at her coronation with Napoleon in 1804, but she was definitely hiding something. She had kids from a previous marriage, and she'd been lying about her age for years. Napoleon was obsessed with creating this image of them as this perfect imperial couple, and Josephine's past didn't exactly fit the narrative. She'd been married before to a guy who got his head chopped off during the Revolution. She had 2 teenage kids, and she was actually 6 years older than Napoleon, not younger like she claimed. During that famous coronation painted by Jacques-Louis David, the one where Napoleon crowns himself and then crowns Josephine, she's kneeling there looking all innocent and virginal. And meanwhile, she's a middle-aged mom who's survived prison, poverty, and the reign of terror. The painting literally lies about what she looked like. David made her look younger and more beautiful than she actually was at that point. The really sad part of Josephine's story is that she couldn't have any more children. She'd had 2 kids with her first husband, but by the time she married Napoleon, she was in her 30s and apparently couldn't conceive again. Napoleon eventually divorced her specifically to marry someone younger who could give him an heir. So Josephine's secret wasn't about being pregnant when she shouldn't be. It was about not being able to get pregnant when she absolutely needed to be. Queen Victoria is a whole different ballgame because this woman was basically pregnant for like half of her entire reign. Victoria had 9 children, and yeah, she was definitely pregnant during some of her major royal events and jubilees. She hated being pregnant, by the way. She called it the shadow side of marriage and complained constantly about how uncomfortable and ugly she felt. There are letters where she just tears into the whole pregnancy experience. But duty was duty, and she kept having babies because that's what queens did. The interesting thing about Victoria is that she lived during a time when pregnancy was becoming less of a hidden shame and more of a celebrated state, at least for married women. The Victorian era actually changed a lot of attitudes about motherhood and pregnancy. But even Victoria herself was kind of trapped in this older mentality, where pregnant women were supposed to withdraw from public life during the later months. She hated that restriction because she loved being out there, being seen, having power. There are records suggesting Victoria was in early pregnancy during some public ceremonies and definitely didn't announce it right away. Back then, women usually didn't announce pregnancies until they were showing significantly, partly because of high miscarriage rates, and partly because it was considered indelicate to discuss. So yeah, Victoria probably stood through multiple official events carrying royal babies that nobody knew about yet. The shadow side of Victoria's many pregnancies was the postpartum depression she suffered. She had what we now call serious mental health struggles after several of her births, but that was completely hushed up and hidden from the public. So in a way, Victoria's secret wasn't just about hidden pregnancies. It was about hidden suffering that came with those pregnancies. Princess Diana's situation is completely different because we're now in modern times with cameras everywhere and tabloids going absolutely insane. Diana wasn't pregnant at her wedding to Prince Charles in 1981, but there were definitely rumors and speculation. The tabloids were already obsessed with her body from the moment the engagement was announced. They commented on everything: her weight, her clothes, whether she looked tired, whether she might be showing early pregnancy signs. It was incredibly invasive and honestly pretty gross. What is true is that Diana got pregnant very quickly after the wedding. Prince William was born less than a year after she got married, which meant she conceived within a few months. By the time of her first major royal tour to Australia in 1983, she was pregnant with Harry. And yeah, that was kept quiet for a little while during the early planning stages of the tour. The really messed up thing about Diana's pregnancies is how they were used in the media narrative about her marriage. When she was pregnant and glowing, the press wrote about how happy the royal couple was. When she had postpartum struggles or the marriage started falling apart, suddenly the pregnancies were reframed as traps or obligations. Diana herself later talked about how isolated and unsupported she felt during her pregnancies, especially with William when she was so young and had no idea what she was getting into. Diana's eating disorder also got worse during and after her pregnancies, but that was kept secret for years. So again, we've got this theme of hidden suffering around royal pregnancies that the public doesn't see because everyone's so focused on the fairytale image. Empress Alexandra of Russia was definitely pregnant during Nicholas II's coronation in 1896, and this is actually one of the more straightforward cases. Alexandra was pregnant with their first daughter, Olga, during the massive coronation celebrations in Moscow. The coronation of a Russian Tsar was this absolutely enormous deal with religious ceremonies, parades, balls, and public celebrations that went on for days. Alexandra had to sit through multiple Orthodox services that lasted for hours while standing or kneeling on marble floors. She was in her first trimester dealing with morning sickness and exhaustion while wearing these incredibly heavy formal gowns and jewels. The really tragic thing about this coronation was the Katinka tragedy that happened during the public celebrations. There was a stampede at a public festival where they were giving out free food and souvenirs, and over 1,000 people were trampled to death. Nicholas and Alexandra were criticized for continuing with the scheduled balls and celebrations even after hearing about the disaster. It cast this dark shadow over their entire reign from the very beginning. Alexandra would go on to have 4 daughters and 1 son, Alexei, who had hemophilia. The obsession with producing a male heir, and then the secret about Alexei's illness would eventually contribute to the fall of the Romanov dynasty. Alexandra spent her entire time as empress either pregnant, recovering from pregnancy, or desperately worried about her sick son. The pressure literally helped destroy the Russian monarchy. Finally, let's talk about Mary Queen of Scots because her story is probably the most dramatic of all. Mary wasn't pregnant during a traditional coronation because she became queen as a literal baby, but she was pregnant during several crucial moments of her reign. The most significant was when she returned to Scotland from France as a young widow. There were rumors even then about whether she might be pregnant from her first marriage to the French king, Francis II. She wasn't, but the rumors followed her everywhere. Where things get really wild is during her marriage to Lord Darnley. Mary got pregnant with the future James VI, and the circumstances around that pregnancy were absolutely insane. Darnley was abusive and paranoid, and while Mary was pregnant, he was involved in the murder of her secretary Rizzio, who was stabbed to death literally in front of pregnant Mary. The trauma was unbelievable. Then after she gave birth, Darnley ended up murdered under mysterious circumstances, and Mary married the guy everyone suspected of killing him. She was probably in early pregnancy with twins when all this went down, though she later miscarried. The scandal destroyed her reign. She was forced to abdicate and eventually fled to England, where Elizabeth I kept her prisoner for 19 years before finally executing her. Mary's story shows what happened when royal pregnancies went really, really wrong. Instead of securing her throne, her pregnancies and the scandals around them ended up costing her everything. So what's the common thread through all these stories? Control. Or rather, the complete lack of control these women had over their own bodies and lives. Every single one of these women lived in a world where their primary value was their ability to produce heirs, preferably male ones. Their pregnancies weren't personal joys or private decisions. They were matters of state, subjects of public debate, and tools used either to legitimize or destroy their power. The secret pregnancies weren't always secret because the women wanted them hidden. Sometimes they were secret because announcing too early was dangerous medically or politically. Sometimes they were secret because the timing was scandalous. And sometimes they weren't really secret at all, just officially unacknowledged because that's how things were done. What really gets me is how modern this all feels despite being ancient history. We still obsess over famous women's bodies. We still speculate about celebrity pregnancies. We still judge women based on their reproductive choices. The technology is different. The clothes are different. But that fundamental invasion of privacy and weaponization of women's bodies, that's still happening. These 8 women stood in front of crowds wearing crowns and carrying secrets. And their stories remind us that behind every public image is a private reality that's usually way more complicated and human than the official version. They were powerful and vulnerable at the same time, celebrated and scrutinized, public figures forced to hide the most natural thing in the world. The next time you see a perfectly posed royal photo or a flawless public appearance, remember, there's always more to the story. There's always something happening beneath the surface, behind the smile, under the elaborate gown. These women prove that even queens are human, even crowns can't protect you from judgment, And sometimes the biggest secret you're carrying is literally inside you. History books love to focus on wars and politics and treaties. But sometimes the most important moments happen in private chambers and hidden pregnancies and secrets kept under silk. These 8 women changed the world not just with their crowns, but with what they carried beneath them.